Recording. Good morning. Alright, this is going to be a test. This is the first time I'm doing this. This is the game room. What I have here, this is where we normally would game. Here's my, just to show it off a little bit, my box of Dungeons and Dragons Dragon Mags. Those are my boxes where I keep my Dragon Mags and my Dungeon Mags. That's the back bar where whenever people come over to game, we usually put pizzas and foods. And this is the Game Master's bookshelf. This is the shelf of books they keep by me when I Game Master. Starting at the top, we got a lot of AD&D books, moving to Castles and Crusades. I got a couple shelves of Frog God books, and the bottom is various Dungeon Crawl classics. And Dungeon Crawl classics and Pathfinder books. But today, I would like to focus on one specific game or book or product. I think that what I'm going to try to do is bust out a few books here and there and talk about them and say, hey, this is good, this is why I like it. But what we're going to talk about today, I've heard it called Rappan Athuk. Our game group tends to call it Rappan Athuk. So I don't know about the pronunciation. I have quite a few, we'll go over the history of it. When 3rd edition first came out, the Necromancer games came out with the tagline of 3rd edition rules, 1st edition feel, and they came out with this dungeon in a modular format. It's a good one. It's fun. It did well, and they put out a box set, which I don't have the box set. I have a couple of the modules from the D20, the first and second. There's a third one that I do not have, which I should probably try to pick up soon, but just to have it. But around 2008 or 2010, I believe it was, they put out a new version that was hardback, which is really nice. And that was done both for Pathfinder in this nice, sturdy hardback, and Swords and Wizardry in a similar sturdy hardback. Now, if you notice, the Swords and Wizardry one is not as thick because the stats for Pathfinder were off the hook. It makes the book much bigger. If I were to tell you which version I prefer, I would say that this here Swords and Wizardry edition is my favorite of the Rappan Athuk books so far. There's also a 5th edition version out for 5th edition D&D. If you play that, I don't have any 5th edition books, but it's got some really nice art. Along with that came out expansions as well. We have the Rappan Athuk expansions right here. This is a great place to start. If you're going to get into Rappan Athuk, I suggest having the expansions books. Largely because the best place to start playing this, I found, was in the expansions. Now, over here, we're going to turn my direction over here to my bookshelf of various Swords and Wizardry games and Frog God games, etc., etc. I'm trying to find the Rappan Athuk books that are still in here that I didn't manage to pull out still. But we have, it has a lot of stuff out for Rappan Athuk if you're looking to run it. I'll say this much: it's a giant dungeon. It's in the middle of what they call the Forest of Hope, which is not so hopeful. It's really, if you want to run this completely through, I mean, it could take years. You can play this thing for a long time. There's a lot of great stuff in it, but then again, it's not exactly like something you can breeze through quickly. Very challenging. Definitely one of those places where you go to die. I'm going to pull this out here. What I have here is, at some point in time, I believe they put out this nice Game Master screen or Dungeon Master screen or whatever you want to call it. Shaky hands. That I have right here. It's got some art from the earlier versions of it for the outside of Orcus. Orcus plays heavily in that. If you're not familiar with Orcus, he is a demon from older D&D editions. Now, the screen itself, this one that came out, has like a map. If we could, I don't know how well that shows the map. It's also got level connections, rumors, and then another map of the outside area around the dungeon. Now, the outside area around the dungeon is a big place that's in a lot of the expansions. when the 5th edition came out, they came out with a few books that expanded and added some of the new stuff to the Swords and Wizardry and Pathfinder version with that beautiful art that it has. So let's pull this out. Nice full colored art in these. I'm a big fan of the black and white art in the original books, but I can appreciate the art that's in here. The text is full color, but it's still easy to read because it's not like on too much of a watermark background like some are. So we got all these crazy full color art, Dark and Doom. Adventures in Zelkor Ferry. Now, I've not run this version here of the stuff in this one. This is newer 5th edition stuff, but a lot of the Zelkor's Ferry stuff. Zelkor's Ferry is a little small town, really tiny, little ferry on the river. And it is a good starting point for players. There's also a castle within the expansions. That's a good starting point. Raiding the castle, freeing it from goblins, etc., etc., is a great way to start your campaign. Between the Zelkor's Ferry stuff and the castle stuff, you can get first level characters built up enough to try to start handling some of the earlier, easier sections of the dungeon. Now, again, this is pretty deep, pretty big. There's the beginning. It starts off with wilderness and dying outside of the dungeon, so you got all kinds of adventures. Like, you could do a whole campaign outside this dungeon looking for it. There's enough information here. When I run this, I can only usually get through a couple of these pages a session. But you have all kinds of interesting characters and villains that you can interact with outside, including this massive church-type nightmarish place that your characters can stumble on. So you can have a lot of fun with it. When you get into the dungeon itself, it gets a little interesting. Each level, all the different levels have unique properties, and etc., etc. So it's a fun dungeon delve. It's just difficult. It's not the easiest thing to get through, but I strongly suggest it. You can plop it into your campaign or play it in the Lost Lands, which is the Frog God's official setting, which is what I've really been focusing on here lately while gaming. The Lost Lands is a great place to play, and Rappan Athuk is a wonderful place to start exploring the Lost Lands. Now, I'll say our gaming group, while it was messing around in the Lost Lands, going through Rappan Athuk, through the dungeon, they eventually fled the dungeon and never wanted to come back. So they've been wandering through the Lost Lands for at least a year or more now, outside of the dungeon, away from the dungeon and other parts. They've made it towards the Stoneheart Mountains, but we'll get into the Stoneheart Mountains in a future video. I hope you all enjoyed a look at some game books, and have a nice day.